Hi everybody, Jennifer Schaus here. We're coming to you live today from Washington, D.C. And thank you for joining us in our DFARS webinar series. We are covering the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. This is a series that is ending this week. We are at the second to the last webinar. Today is DFARS Part 252. Clauses, and then on Friday we'll cover DFARS Part 253. That will be a wrap. And if you've been with us throughout the duration, we appreciate you joining us. As you know, our webinars have been held on Wednesdays and Fridays every day at noon Eastern, unless there was a holiday or something that interrupted us. All of our webinars are complimentary thanks to our sponsors and recorded. You can find them over on our YouTube channel where we've got over 9,500 subscribers and almost 800 complimentary government contracting videos. All of the corresponding PowerPoints can be found over on slideshare.net. That's a free site. You can log in with your LinkedIn credentials to download any of the PowerPoints, and many of them obviously have some active links in them. And if you are just looking for the recordings over on our website or signing up for Friday's webinar, the final one in the series, over on our website, just click on the section called DFARS, and you'll notice on the left-hand side, we actually covered the DFARS back in 2021. Some of those parts and regulations might be a little bit out of date, so obviously that's why we decided to tackle it again this year. And it still is, we'll say, something that has a heartbeat and is currently evolving and changing. So stay abreast of current events and news to stay on top of these things. Quick blurb about us. We do provide services for government contractors with a primary focus on helping companies get onto the GSA schedule. We also help with medical supplies, medical services, obviously for that VA schedule. Some of the other services are listed here. You can find them on our website as well. Separate from that, we also help companies that are selling to federal contractors, so the banks, law firms, payroll companies, accounting, etc. We've got a newsletter where you can advertise, webinars obviously that you can sponsor, as well as events. If you want our media kit, which has pricing on all of those options, you can send us an email to the hello@jenniferschaus.com and we will respond with the pricing. The advertising options, the statistics related to advertising are listed here. We've reached almost 40,000 subscribers, most of which are government contractors, with almost 30% open rates. We do have an event coming up. It's our Comic-Con conference where we're going to cover CMMC, AI and proposals, the FAR 2.0, and DCAA compliance. You can sponsor, you can attend, you can learn more at the link there on the bottom of your screen. Okay, we want to thank our in-kind sponsors, govevents.com. That's the premier platform for posting events related to government and government contracting. You can find all of our events, our webinars, and the recordings over on govevents.com. We also want to thank the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority. They have an online calendar for events and webinars in the local DC metro area. You can find all of our events and webinars over on the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority website calendar. Also, setasidealert.com has a publication which posts opportunities for small women-owned, veteran-owned, hubs-owned, and 8A firms. They also post our events and webinars, and you can find them on the setasidealert.com newsletter. We also want to thank the Virginia Apex Accelerator. That's a trusted resource and DoD-funded organization. They provide local training, counseling, and mentoring for aspiring government contractors, as well as matchmaking events. If you want to sell to state, local, or federal governments, please contact your local Apex Accelerator. You can visit the links on your screen to review the training calendar, locate free resources, and schedule an appointment with your Virginia Apex counselor today. Okay, we also want to thank our paid sponsors, which is what allows us to put this series on at no cost to you. So our friends over at BidSpeed have a platform that allows users to search public sector opportunities at the federal, state, and local level. Users can also find anything from a compliance matrix to teaming partners, incumbent point of contacts, expiring contracts, and proposal templates. Discover, manage, and secure government contracts with BidSpeed. BidSpeed is an official partner of the SBA's ETG Empower to Grow program. Contact BidSpeed today. We also want to thank C3. If you're thinking about contracting with the DoD, you need to prepare for CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. C3 suite of CMMC solutions include C3 Command, C3 Catalyst, and C3 Core. These solutions answer the needs of every defense contractor. Whether your CMMC priority is a fast defined path to compliance or you need the flexibility to manage multiple environments, C3 offers solutions. They are your partner with a deep expertise in IT, cybersecurity, and compliance. You can contact C3 today. They are also sponsoring our event on compliance on October 8th over at Carosoft, so you'll hear more about CMMC again at our event, our Comic-Con event. WorkPlan. WorkPlan is an online contract management and accounting tool designed for federal contractors and hosted by Amazon Web Services. Get and stay DCAA compliant, manage expenses, timekeeping, and forecasting, plus use the WorkPlan platform to manage your capture process and your CRM. Contractors can integrate their HR and payroll into this one easy-to-use solution. Contact WorkPlan today. Ateria. Ateria specializes in Microsoft Cloud licenses and services for government and contractors. Ateria provides a business advantage for Microsoft government cloud licensing, managed IT administration and security, as well as data intelligence services and solutions. They implement secure, compliant, and scalable solutions to enhance operations, reduce risk, and uncover opportunities. Contact Ateria for expert IT assistance. Okay. Last but not least, we want to thank our friends over at Gov White Papers. Gov White Papers is the central hub for government and government contractors to find and post content geared towards solving public sector challenges. With your free membership, you can add relevant white papers, case studies, data sheets, and more, making your content available to a wider government audience. Have the expertise but not the content? Gov White Papers can also create materials to meet your specific needs. You can join for free today at govwhitepapers.com. And the reason we are here today is to cover the DFARS, part 252. We have the dynamic duo from Kroll and Mooring, Eric Henderson and Taylor McDaniels. I'm going to stop talking and turn the floor now over to Eric and Taylor. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to put together the content and then just sharing your time with us today and your expertise. So without further ado, I give you all Eric Henderson. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thank you all for coming here today. Like Jennifer said, my name is Eric Herendeen, and I'm at Kroll and Mooring. I've been now at Kroll since 2021, and I practice primarily in the claims disputes area. Prior to that, I was at another firm here in town, and then prior to that, I clerked at the Civilian Board of Contract Appeals. So I've been practicing now for about 10 years, focusing on disputes and issues between government and contractors, as well as commercial disputes. Taylor, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Eric. Thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Taylor McDaniels, and I am currently a second-year associate at Kroll and Mooring. I started at Kroll last September after clerking at the CBCA for a year. And similar to Eric, my practice primarily focuses on claims litigation, and I'm dealing with disputes between the government and contractors. I think, Jennifer, we're ready to get started. If you want to go to the next slide. To begin, we wanted to just give a brief overview of DFARS 252. DFARS 252 is a key component of defense contracting and compliance, and Part 252 contains clauses that are specific to the DoD and are used in DoD solicitations and contracts. And today we're going to cover clauses concerning cybersecurity, data rights, subcontractors and supply chain, contractor remedy granting clauses, government remedy granting clauses, and contractor responsibility. Next slide. DFARS 252 provides the legal framework for the specific requirements that DoD contractors and subcontractors must adhere to. And while the DFARS differs from the FAR, which contains the clauses for civilian contracts, the DFARS should be read in conjunction with the primary set of rules in the FAR. Understanding the specific clauses in DFARS 252 is essential for successful contracting and avoiding potential problems. And today our goal is to share key insights and to provide knowledge needed to confidently navigate the requirements in DFARS 252. Eric, do you have anything to add before we dive into the specific clauses?
The only thing that I would add is, for these clauses in 252, it certainly relates to contractor responsibility, also government responsibility within the contracts. And so to the extent the government is not following its obligations under there, that's generally where Taylor and I step in for disputes as well for recovery. But go ahead, Taylor.
Great, thanks, Eric. Jennifer, next slide, please. To start, a category of clauses that stand out to us in Part 252 are the clauses that deal with cybersecurity and safeguarding DoD information. We'll cover several clauses, including clauses that create requirements for protecting sensitive defense information, safeguarding national security, maintaining a robust defense industrial base, and ensuring reliability of the defense supply chain. Next slide. First, to start, DFARS 252-204-7012 requires contractors to safeguard covered defense information, or CDI, and report cyber incidents quickly and effectively. To do this, contractors must ensure that their system is compliant with NIST SP 800-171, and this publication provides guidelines for protecting CDI in non-federal systems and organizations. Any requests to vary from that requirements outlined in the publication must be in writing to the CO and must be considered by the DoD CIO. Also, under this clause, when contractors discover a cyber incident that affects a covered contractor information system or any of the CDI, contractors must conduct a review for evidence of any compromised CDI or CUI and report the information to the DoD within 72 hours of discovery of the cyber incident. And this clause also includes a flow-down requirement, which obligates prime contractors to ensure that their subcontractors comply with the clause. Next, DFARS 252-204-7019 requires contractors to have a current assessment of the cybersecurity requirements outlined in NIST SP 800-171. These assessments are valid for 3 years, and contractors must submit their score to the Supplier Performance Risk System. And an up-to-date assessment must be on file before contract award or renewal. Next slide. Similarly, in DFARS 252-204-7020, this clause enables the DoD to have oversight to verify contractor cybersecurity claims. This clause gives the DoD authority to verify contractor cybersecurity assessments and ensure accurate reporting under the NIST publication. Contractors must provide the DoD access to their facilities, systems, and personnel to allow the DoD to validate their assessment scores. This clause is also required to be flowed down to subcontractors. And next, under DFARS 252-204-7021, contractors must have a cybersecurity maturity model certification, or CMMC, at the level specified in the contract prior to award. And these levels vary. For example, CMMC level 1 contains basic requirements. CMMC level 2 has more advanced security requirements. And of course, there are higher levels for more sensitive information or requirements. And like most of the cybersecurity clauses located in DFARS 252, this clause also flows down, and subcontractors must meet the CMMC level certifications as required by the contract. Okay, next slide. And finally, to close out the cybersecurity section of our presentation, DFARS 252-204-7000 prohibits the unauthorized public release of unclassified information related to DoD contracts without prior written approval from the contracting officer, or if the information was already publicly available. The request to the contracting officer must be in writing. It must detail the specific information that the contractor wishes to release, the medium to be used to release the information, and the purpose for the release. And the request must be submitted at least 10 business days before the proposed date for release. And this clause also flows down to subcontractors. Now Eric will discuss DFARS 252 clauses that are related to data rights and subcontracting in the supply chain.
Thanks, Taylor. When it comes to the data rights clauses in DFARS, the balance here to keep in mind is that the government wants to be able to use these licenses in order to promote competition and effectuate what it wants under its various programs, while at the same time balancing the contractor's interests and protecting its intellectual property assets. Under these clauses, the government acquires rights in proprietary information, rights and licenses in the proprietary information, but the contractor maintains the ownership of that. And because DoD frequently purchases large, complex systems, the distinction between the FAR requirements for data rights and the DFARS is the DFARS tends to be more prescriptive in its rules and procedures than would otherwise be found in the FAR. Can go to the next slide. In the DFARS clauses, the distinction between these can really be broken up into several large categories of items. The difference between technical data and computer software, as well as commercial and non-commercial distinctions. Here, the 7013 clause relates to technical data that is not commercial. In order to break apart and understand this clause, it's good to keep in mind some of the key definitions related to it. The first is technical data. Technical data can be is any recorded information, regardless of the method, that's scientific or technical in nature. It can include things like graphic information, pictorial information, drawings, photographs, specifications, any sort of design, engineering type of information related to those specifications. And the technical data, the distinction is it does not include things like computer software or financial information, administrative, cost or pricing data, or management information. It's that proprietary technical information that the contractor retains ownership of. Under this provision, the government receives a non-exclusive right, and as you can see on the slides here, the scope of that right is really driven by the funding source of that technical information, the technical data. The first category of right that the government can have under this provision is a government unlimited right. This is when the technical data is developed at U.S. government expense exclusively. And this unlimited right is quite broad in nature. It allows the government to use, reproduce, modify, perform, display, release, disclose the technical data in part or in whole for any purpose whatsoever, and does not have to seek any sort of authorization in order to do so. So this could include, for instance, posting the technical data publicly on the internet, or even giving the data to a contractor's competitor for use in a competition. The second category is government purpose right. This is when the proprietary technical data was developed with mixed funding. So the source could be charged to a contractor's indirect cost pool, and then partially charged to a government contractor specifically funded under a government contract. And so there's a mixed funding source. The level of funding for each party is irrelevant for this consideration. So if one US dollar goes to the funding, then it becomes a mixed funding source. Under the government purpose right specifically, it's similar to the unlimited right, but it is limited to a disclosure for government purposes only. A government purpose is defined as any activity in which the government is one party within the transaction. So it could show up within cooperative agreements, international or multinational defense organizations, sales are transferred to foreign governments, international organizations. It can be included in government procurements, but it can't be included for commercial purposes. The third category will be government limited right. And this is when the proprietary information is developed exclusively at private expense. Under this government limited right, it allows the government to use, modify, reproduce, etc., only within the government. There are certain limited exceptions to that, but the information must stay within the government. The other important caveat to that is that a government unlimited right license will be applied to two categories of information within this clause. The first is form, fit, and function data. And this consists of data that describes the overall physical, functional, performance characteristics of an item to the extent necessary to permit the identification physically and functionally interchangeable parts. And so it goes to that form, fit, and function piece of it. The other type of information that will be subject to unlimited rights is operation, maintenance, installation, and training data. And as described in the title, it's going to be information that's related to the installation, operation, maintenance of an item. It doesn't include the detailed manufacturing process or any sort of steps or sequences in the manufacturing process or assembly data that would permit it to be reproduced. Can go to the next slide. The second category of non-commercial data goes into the distinction that's no longer technical data, but instead computer software. Computer software is defined as any computer program, source code, algorithm, design detail, process flowchart, formula, etc. that is related to material that would enable the software to be reproduced, recreated, or recompiled. And so this excludes things like computer databases. It excludes software documentation. It is simply for the computer software itself. So things under the documentation like an owner's manual or user's manual would be excluded from this data rights clause, limiting the use of it. Under those, the government usually gets an unlimited right. And similar to the technical data, a similar principle applies to the funding source and then the scope of the right applied, where the government could get unlimited right, it could get purpose right, and then the distinction here is on the third category. Instead of a limited right, it goes to a government restricted right. And here, the funding source is exclusively private, and then the contractor is also the sole source of that software. Under the license itself, the government can only use the computer software on one computer at a time, or depending on how it is negotiated under the agreement. If the government is to modify the computer software in any way, it can only do so in limited circumstances. And then if it is transferred to a new computer, prior copies must be destroyed. So it's very limited use. There are some exceptions to that license. So for instance, if the government were to make copies in order to create a backup or an archive, that would be permitted under the clause. Or it permits subcontractors or other contractors to access the software to diagnose or correct any sort of deficiencies within that. And generally, under this provision, any users of the software are going to be subject to an NDA, and the government cannot otherwise decompile, disassemble, or reverse engineer the software itself. So there are more restrictions for this type of government restricted license, right? You can go to the next slide. And then the third provision we'll cover here today for data rights is commercial technical data. Generally under this, the license is going to be that which is customarily provided to the public with a commercial product, commercial service, or commercial process. And the parties can negotiate an alternative license. There are two basic categories for the for commercial technical data. The first is unrestricted rights, where the government may use, modify, release, disclose the data provided without any sort of restrictions. Commercial data that falls in this category is data that was previously provided with unrestricted rights, form, fit, function data, the operations, maintenance, installation data, as well as any data generated to correct or repair commercial data. Everything that does not fall in those categories comes under the restricted right, which functionally acts similar to a limited right, where the government can only use it for internal purposes and cannot release it without contractor permission. Here, there's a presumption that all of the commercial data has been developed at a private expense, which is why there is a more restricted right generally applied to the commercial technical data. But the US government does have any rights that had previously attached to commercial technical data that had then since become commercial over the evolution of its use. We can go to the next slide. The next category we wanted to cover today on the DFARS is one that has come up a lot lately, and that goes to supply chain subcontractor requirements. Can go to the next slide. Here, what we're going to cover are things that touch in on the Buy America Act, which effectively gives a preferential treatment for domestic services, supplies, manufactured goods, construction materials, etc. Can go to the next slide. The first two clauses we want to cover are the 7000 and 7001 clause that tend to work together under this. So the 7001 clause implements the Buy America Act and requires contractors to provide items that are domestic end products under the contract or from qualifying countries. The key definition here is the domestic end product. The domestic end product is an unmanufactured item mined or produced in the US, or it is a manufactured item in the US where a certain percentage of the cost of the components are mined, produced, or manufactured in the US. So it can either be the unmanufactured item itself or the component parts of a manufactured item in the US. Component parts with unknown origin sources are treated as foreign for purposes of this clause. The other definition to keep in mind here is the component. A component is any article, material, or supply that gets incorporated directly into an end product itself. And then, the 7001 clause implements the Buy America Act. The 7000 clause is a requirement within offers and a certification requirement on offerors that they are providing end products that are either come under the domestic preference or come from quote unquote qualifying countries. A qualifying country is simply an identified source country for an item that will be listed what the item is and what the qualifying country is. And then the offeror must certify that it is meeting those requirements of the qualifying countries as well. So this gives a preference to either domestic products or to qualifying country products. The next clause that we wanted to cover is the 7012 clause. And this is it is not a Buy America Act clause strictly, but it does provide a domestic preference for certain items like foods and materials. And so it's good to keep in mind, again, if you're a contractor who is instead not providing a manufactured good, but instead foods or materials, this clause may be in there and has a domestic preference as well. You can go to the next slide. In conjunction with supply chain, there are other considerations that you want to keep in mind and look for within contracts. This includes, for instance, the 7013 clause here, the duty-free entry clause. This allows contractors to import either end products or components duty-free into the United States from qualifying countries. The contractor on the import still has to pay a duty on imported end products and component parts that are being imported for non-governmental use, but at least for the governmental use items, those become duty-free. And then the qualifying country typically will mean those that were previously identified under the 7000 clause that we just discussed, or under trade agreement or some other identified source where the contractor can claim duty-free entry. The clause itself also outlines the documentation and notification requirements for contractors, and then it requires a flow down of duty-free entry to the contractors, subcontractors, and within its supply chain. The next clause relates to trade agreements. And as you can see here, this requires end products either be US made or from qualifying countries, or permits that the end products come under the certain identified trade agreements, which include like the World Trade Organization, government procurement agreement, or free trade agreements, or any sort of other identified trade agreements that would require where the end product comes from. There are certain waivers to it for national interests that are also to keep in mind as you look at your contract and review the clauses. You can go to the next slide. And then finally, under this broad category of subcontractor and supply chain, we wanted to touch in on some DFARS clauses that speak to the subcontractor relationships here. And so on the 244-7000 clause, this goes to the government's, when the government is purchasing commercial products or commercial services, the government may include this clause to specifically limit the clauses that the prime contractor does flow down to its subcontractor. And so this would be important not only at the prime level to keep in mind what it cannot flow down and restrict on its subcontractors, but also for subcontractors to be able to see what its prime contractors may be limited from requiring within the subcontract itself. And then the last clause here that we'll cover in this section is the 246-7007 clause. And this goes to the DFARS and DoD's interest in avoiding counterfeit electronic parts. It requires contractors to maintain a system to detect and avoid counterfeit electronic parts. And then it lists system criteria that are required for contractors to have if this clause is included within their contract. There are 12 different criteria that are covered within the system requirements, and it mandates things like training, inspection, testing, reporting, supplier management, and then reporting or quarantining any found counterfeit parts that are within its supply chain. And because this is an important consideration for DoD, it requires that this clause, if included at the prime level, be flowed down throughout the supply chain in order to avoid those. You can go to the next slide. And then we'll pass it back over to Taylor to cover contractor remedy granting clauses.
All right, thanks, Eric. For our next section, contractor remedy granting clauses, we'll discuss and highlight Part 252 clauses that provide legal or financial remedies to contractors when government actions impact contractor performance, cost, or delivery. First, the 243-7002 clause allows contractors to seek compensation when changes to the contract increase costs or delay the work. And the equitable adjustment can include both direct and indirect costs, but these costs must be allocable to the change. In preparing an equitable adjustment, contractors should submit detailed justification of the change or delay and how the change or delay increases the cost. And also, it's important to note that within the 7002 clause itself, the clause includes certification language that must be included in any REA, and it must be signed by an official from the contractor. Next, 217-7003 permits the contracting officer to make changes by written order. These changes can include, for example, changes to specifications, the method of performance, or the work scope. However, the contractor will be entitled to an REA if the changes increase the cost of the performance of the work. This request to the contracting officer must be submitted within 10 days of the notification of the change, and the contractor may also request an extension to submit an REA within these 10 days. But the main point here is to remember that you have to submit something within 10 days of the notification of the change, whether that's the REA or the request to the contracting officer for an extension. It's also, we want to highlight that contractors must continue performance while negotiating the adjustment. No suspension is authorized unless specifically directed by the contracting officer. Okay, next slide. Next, DFARS 252-217-7028 allows the contractor to be compensated for work that is considered over and above the general scope of the contract. And this this occurs most often in vessel repair or maintenance contracts. Over and above work is defined as overhaul, maintenance, and repair efforts that are within the general scope of the contract and not covered by the line items for the basic work under the contract and necessary in order to satisfactorily complete the contract. And the difference between over and above work and changes is that changes are considered outside of the work scope, whereas over and above work are within the general scope of the contract. Contractors must not perform over and above work without prior written approval from the contracting officer or a contracting officer's authorized representative. And similar to changes, a contractor will be entitled to an equitable adjustment if the over and above work increases the cost. And like all REAs, the contractor must submit a proposal detailing the work cost and the impact. And then DFARS 252-243-7001 requires the use of FAR Part 31 and DFARS Part 231 in making price adjustments. These clauses aim to make any adjustments fair, consistent, and transparent, and that provides a standardized auditable method for negotiating contract modifications. This clause applies to all negotiated contract changes and to both cost type and fixed price type contracts. Next slide. Next, clauses 7000 and 7001 provides indemnification for losses under limited circumstances. Generally, these losses must result from unusually hazardous risks. It's also important to remember that these hazardous risks must be specifically defined in the contract for the contractor to have indemnification or protection for losses. And it's also important to recover The contractor must comply with all safety regulations and contract terms. And then finally, the DFARS includes several economic price adjustment clauses, 216, 7000, 7001, and 7003. These clauses allow upward and sometimes downward adjustments if the cost of specific materials change beyond expected levels. And these clauses basically protect contractors from cost volatility for certain materials. The adjustment will be calculated based on the difference between the base price and the current market price and the quantities of the affected materials used. Next slide. Okay, now I'm going to pass it back over to Eric to talk about government remedy granting clauses.
Thanks, Taylor. Can go to, there we go, perfect. Under this, we wanted to touch in on a number of different clauses that the government may include in its contracts in order to control its costs on those contracts. The first one, the 217-7027, relates to contract definitization. This clause is included in what are termed undefinitized contract actions, or otherwise known as a UCA. A UCA is effectively a letter contract where the government and the contractor agree to begin performance out of some sense of urgency on the contract itself, with the idea of negotiating a final price while the parties are actually performing the contract. So the clause requires a negotiation of a definitized contract, including all terms and conditions, and requires the contractor to submit a qualifying proposal with certified cost or pricing data in order to initiate negotiations with the government. Generally, under these clauses, a date is provided by which the parties will come to a definitized contract amount. But if no agreement is agreed to by the target date, the government has the unilateral right to make a determination on what is the contract price. It has to be based on a reasonable pricing fee for the contractor. What is new as of this past year, when the government makes a unilateral determination on definitizing the contract, that is now a U.S. government claim that is directly appealable to either the Armed Services Board of Contract Appeals or the Court of Federal Claims. And so if you receive a unilateral definitization specifically under this clause, then it is considered a government claim that is directly appealable and challengeable in litigation. Another way that the government can control costs on its contract is under this 232-7007 DFARS provision. This applies to incrementally funded contracts. And here, the government's payment obligation is only limited to the amounts that have been funded on the specific contract line items. And the requirement on the contractor is that the contractor must then notify the contracting officer when they are nearing, under this clause, 85% of available funds. The contractor is not permitted to work beyond or in excess of those funds. And the risk for the contractor is if they do work over and above those amounts, they are doing so at their own risk. And if they fail to provide notice, they are also working at risk with the government, because the idea behind this clause is that the government wants to be able to control its costs on the contract. And if it chooses not to allot more funds onto the contract, it has the right to terminate for convenience the additional work that has not been funded. And then finally, another way that the government can control costs on its contracts is under this 236-7006 clause. Here, the requirement is that there are going to be certain limits of costs listed within a schedule on the contract, and that the contractor, or I should say the offeror, must separately price those out. Those prices must include all costs, overhead, profit, its total price on the limitation, and that offerers may may be rejected by the government if they are unbalanced or in excess of the cost limitations. And so again, this is the government's efforts on the front end in order to control the price, the ultimate price of a contract or certain items within a contract. You can go to the next slide. And finally, we're going to touch on what we've termed to be contractor responsibility. These are clauses that you'll want to keep in mind and see within your contract just to ensure that you're being a responsible contracting partner as you're performing under these contracts. You can go to the next slide. There are certain clauses out here to keep in mind. So for instance, there's a prohibition on having convicted persons perform on a contract when they've been convicted of fraud. This is specific to DoD. It applies to management boards, consultants, anyone with decisional authority on the contract. There's generally a 5-year restriction after the conviction. Any sort of violation is going to be a penalty, a monetary penalty against the contractor. And then additional remedies for the government may include suspension, debarment, the cancellation or termination of a contract. And so it's important to keep in mind that restriction as being a good contracting partner with the government. And then the next clause to keep in mind is the 203-7002 clause, which goes to protecting whistleblowers. Again, this is mandatory, and it goes to the government's interests in permitting whistleblowers and that contractors inform its employees about its rights in performance of the contract. And then the last clause we will cover today is the 242-7005, which really works in conjunction with 242-7004. Under these clauses, they apply to contracts that are subject to cost accounting standards. And it is an implementing clause that requires contractors to maintain certain acceptable systems in performance of the contract. So this can include accounting, earned value management, estimating, material management, property management, purchasing, all of these systems that the contractor will need to maintain under the CAS standards. The clauses require that if there's any sort of material weakness within any of these systems, that it will be subject to a corrective action plan and must be addressed within 45 days. The government then will have a right to withhold certain amounts of payment if those corrective action plans are not implemented within the systems. And so it's important for contractors to identify any sort of material weaknesses in order to avoid payment withholdings and provide a timely response and corrective action plan to avoid any sort of financial impact or contract disruption. You can go to the next slide. And again, we wanted to cover a wide swath of contract clauses that you might find within your contracts that you may want to be aware of. Importantly, as Taylor said at the top end, it's important to keep in mind what are your rights and responsibilities under the contract and your obligations, and what are the government's. It will impact contractors financially if they run afoul of any of those, and it may be beneficial to keep in mind what the government's obligations are under the contracts as well, in order to ensure that if the government runs afoul of those, that there can be recovery for the government's non-compliance as well. As I said, my name's Eric Herendeen. It's been a pleasure having you all today. My colleague is Taylor McDaniels, and we do appreciate your time, and thank you for having us be here. Jennifer?
Yep, thanks again, Eric and Taylor. Eric, I apologize. I believe I was mispronouncing your name up front. Just too quick to say Henderson as soon as I saw the HE. So sincere apologies.
No problem at all. Happens all the time.
Okay, good stuff. Well, you and Taylor did a fantastic job covering everything from, I don't know, REAs, some of the flow down clauses, everything here that is obviously important in DFARS Part 252. So we also want to thank everyone who has attended the live version here with us today. Please contact Eric and Taylor directly. Obviously, they know what they're doing. They've got a nice government contracting practice over at Crowell & Mooring. Two very smart and helpful people that will be easy to work with. So you've got both of their contact information here. And again, thanks for sharing your time and expertise with us. If anyone is listening to this over on the YouTube channel, so you're listening to the recording, give us a like, leave a comment. We would love to hear from you. And a quick reminder on our Comic-Con conference over at Carasoft headquarters in Reston, Virginia on October 8th. We're covering some of the topics that you see here, plus a cocktail reception from 5 to 6 that's included in the ticket price. We've got attendee tickets and sponsor tables available. Love to see you there. Again, thanks to Eric and Taylor, and we'll pick up on Friday with DFARS Part 253 as we close out this series. Thanks again, everybody.